I've read the script, I've watched Logan multiple times, I've even watched Logan while reading the script. And here's the thing, Story Geeks. Logan doesn't deserve an Oscar. And there are two reasons why. But before you hit dislike, let me explain. And then, if you think I'm crazy, which I might be, then you can totally dislike it. James Mangold's film and its script are very good and sometimes great. In fact, through most of Act 2, Logan does deserve an Oscar. But two things prevent Logan from reaching all-time levels of awesome: Professor X's death and Logan's sickness. Before I reveal why, let's dig deeper into the story's setup. At the beginning of the film, a worn-down, haggard Logan wants to take an extremely dangerous 90-plus-year-old powder keg named Charles Xavier and leave humanity behind to live as hermits on a boat. This Logan is different. He's not a hero, not anymore, and maybe he never was. He certainly doesn't believe he ever was. He tells Laura that the X-Men comic books aren't real. They're just made up or embellished propaganda. Logan lacks hope. He doesn't see himself contributing to a better world. He's just lost in a very broken one where humans have turned on mutants and on each other. To sum up Logan's character at the beginning of the film, Logan is a broken man who wants to escape and who desperately needs hope and a purpose. Let's contrast that with Charles. An old, decrepit Professor X struggles with some form of dementia and has to be heavily medicated to prevent his seizures from killing those around him. He used to live in a mansion, his very own school for the gifted, but now he lives in an abandoned smelting plant in Mexico. But unlike Logan, Charles still feels like he has a purpose. Yes, he's extremely broken, just like Logan is, and maybe even more so, but despite that, he maintains a sense of hope. He's willing to sacrifice his own well-being to protect others, like Laura. Professor X remains a hero in spite of his brokenness. Two of our favorite characters, both very broken versions of themselves, and yet each has a very different perspective. And that's when we're introduced to Laura, a young mutant in desperate need of help and guidance. Without it, she'll be killed or controlled. I love the setup, and based on this setup, where do we expect this story to go? What do we want for Logan? How do we want his character to develop? What do we want for Laura? And finally, what do we hope happens to Professor X? Based on the setup that the storytellers give us, here's what they're indicating may be in store for these characters. Logan must find a purpose, and that purpose should provide him with a sense of hope. Laura must realize that she can become a hero, despite the tragic things that have happened to her. She can rise above those things. If those things don't happen, this movie may end up being a tragedy. In order for this story to truly work, in order for it to really resonate, Logan must change. And in order for us to identify that Logan has changed, he must make a clear, compelling choice to signal that the change has occurred. The writers foreshadow Logan's choice from the beginning. He can choose to run and escape from the world, or he can choose to help others. And it just so happens Laura needs help. Laura needs someone to protect her, someone to teach her how to navigate a world that could force her to become desperate and self-loathing. Does that sound familiar? Yes, because that's what Logan has become. This is an amazing setup for a great character arc. The choice is clear. In order for Logan to become a true hero, he must sacrifice his own well-being and show Laura a better way of living. If he does that, his choice will be compelling and real, and we'll see that he has indeed changed. But remember those two things I talked about earlier, the two things that really hurt this story? Well, they hurt the story because they make Logan's choice too easy. It's too easy for Logan to make the choices he makes, which makes it hard for us to determine whether or not he's truly changed. What are those two things? As I mentioned before, Professor X's death at the hands of X-24 and Logan's sickness, the adamantium poisoning that's killing him. Let's take a closer look at Logan's choices. What does Logan actually choose? His first choice is to take Laura to Eden. But we don't get the sense that he's really any different. He hasn't really changed, not yet. In fact, he's sort of taking her there to prove a point that there's no hope left. He's still hopeless and desperate. He makes the choice to take her to Eden, but he hasn't changed. A more notable choice occurs when he chooses to give up the Sunseeker money. The mutant kids offer him the money he was promised, but he gives it back to them. Does that signal a change in Logan? Well, it's a nice thing to do, but it doesn't prove Logan has changed. Remember I mentioned that Xavier's death created a big problem for this film? Well, this is why. Since Charles died, Logan doesn't want the Sunseeker. For him to give up the money doesn't necessarily signal any sort of character change. He just doesn't need the cash anymore. But Logan does make one more choice, the biggest one yet. He helps the mutant kids fight off their pursuers so they can escape to Canada. That's selfless, right? Yeah, a little bit. Except this is where the second issue I mentioned comes in. Logan's dying. He's going to die whether or not he helps save the kids. His options are watch the kids die and then die himself, or save the kids and probably die in the process. He doesn't have to sacrifice that much to make that choice. And if he doesn't help the kids, it'd be hard not to think of him as a villain. Logan does make those choices, but they're too easy. Which means there's not much evidence of a real true change in his character. Professor X's death means that Logan no longer has a compelling reason to escape or run, which means he doesn't need the money for the Sunseeker. And because Logan is dying, choosing to save the kids doesn't seem like a difficult choice. Who would let a group of kids get slaughtered and captured, and tortured even, by the villains? Now, there is one more thing that Logan does. He does give Laura a couple of words of wisdom before he dies. He says, "You don't have to fight anymore. Don't be what they made you." Those are great lines, and it does show Logan teaching Laura how to be different from him so that she doesn't lose hope or struggle to find meaning. Now, for me, that feels like a little bit too little too late. Here's what we want Logan's character development to look like. This level of change would be clear and compelling. It would prove that Logan has gone from being hopeless to hopeful. It would showcase that he believes in the same hope that Xavier believed in, or at least something similar. And it would give us a scene where Logan implores Laura to change, not to be like him, but to be like Charles, which is what we want for Laura. We want her to be hopeful and to choose to be a hero. But we don't get a major character shift in Logan. We get a minor one. A dying Logan with no reason to run chooses to save a group of endangered children who, without help, will die. Not much of a choice, not much of a change. Now, some of you might be thinking, wait, isn't a minor character shift good enough? This is more like real life. You're right, that's true. And James Mangold is definitely aiming for realism. The script reiterates several times that this story is meant to be realistic. But even with the way the movie ends, when Laura repositions the wooden cross to be an X-Men X, it's an indication that Logan should be seen as a hero. But heroes make clear, compelling choices, and Logan never does. Alright, let's recap. Logan does make a choice, but his choice doesn't cost him much. He does give Laura some advice, but that advice, given how he's been behaving, isn't much to go off. Logan's character arc looks more like this when it feels like it should look more like this. We wanted to see Logan find a purpose and gain a sense of hope. We wanted Laura to realize that she can be a hero despite the tragic things that have happened to her. And finally, we wanted Professor X to witness Logan's redemption and Laura's reform. We sort of got some of those things, and I know we can't get all of them. And don't get me wrong, I love tragedies. Watchmen is one of my favorite films. But Logan attempts to toe the line between giving Wolverine a hero's arc and sort of giving us a tragic ending. It wants to be the film Unforgiven, but for me, from a storytelling standpoint, it doesn't really work. I love the movie up until the point where Charles dies, and then it really loses focus. Why does all this matter to me personally? Well, I wanted to feel hope at the end of this film. I wanted to see Logan redeem himself by remembering Charles Xavier's influence on him. I wanted to see Logan become Laura's surrogate father, just like Charles became Logan's surrogate father. More importantly, I wanted to see Logan help Laura become something better than he could ever be. I wanted him to show Laura that human life is valuable and that Professor X strove for something worth pursuing: hope, peace, and finding a purpose. In the end, I didn't really get that. But I feel like there's an indication that I should have gotten that. and that makes me feel conflicted. I know that Wolverine isn't the most hopeful character, but his character arc and his actions could have been more impactful. And in the end, I could have felt more hopeful, like I did at the end of Rogue One. But we didn't really get that. And that's why, as much as I want to see a geek film win an Oscar, I don't know if Logan deserves it. At least not for this category. Now, if Patrick Stewart, Hugh Jackman, or Daphne Keane were nominated for an Oscar, this would be a completely different video. That would have been awesome. But hey, maybe that's just me. Am I crazy? What do you think? Did you love James Mangold's film? Do you think it deserves an Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe for more geek content. And please consider supporting us on Patreon. If you do, we'll send you exclusive geek content. As always, Story Geeks, question everything in your favorite stories, and always seek the truth.